"You don't live here anymore, Mom. You have until Friday to pack your things." My son said it like he was reminding me to take out the trash, not like he was erasing me from a home I had lived in for over 30 years. I looked down at the envelope in my hands, the official stamp, the legal language, the cold precision of it all. Eviction papers. From my own son. I nodded once, carefully folding the document along its crease as if it were something fragile, something that could still be handled with care. "All right," I said quietly. My voice didn't shake. That seemed to surprise him more than anything. Behind him, Ashley leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed, her lips pressed into a thin line that almost resembled a smile. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. The house felt different that morning. The sunlight coming through the windows looked the same, but it didn't belong to me anymore. The hardwood floors I had polished every Sunday for decades, the cabinets I had chosen down to the smallest detail, the dining table where I had served every holiday meal. It all felt like a stage I was about to be escorted off. I set the envelope down on the counter and walked past them without another word. My steps were steady, measured. I could feel their eyes on my back, waiting for something. Tears, anger, begging. But I had nothing to give them. Not anymore. Upstairs, my bedroom was exactly as I had left it. The bed neatly made, the curtains half drawn, my husband's photograph still on the nightstand, his smile frozen in a moment from years ago when everything had felt permanent. I paused there, just for a second. Not to cry, not to grieve, just to remember. Then I opened my closet and reached for a suitcase. Downstairs, I could hear Ashley's voice, low and sharp, whispering something to Daniel. I didn't need to hear the words. I already knew the tone. The same tone she had used for years, soft enough to sound harmless, firm enough to reshape everything around her. It hadn't happened overnight. Nothing like this ever does. It starts small. A suggestion here. A complaint there. A change in plans. A missed dinner. A forgotten phone call. And then one day, you realize you're no longer part of the conversation at all. I placed a few items into the suitcase. Nothing rushed. Nothing careless. Each movement deliberate. As if I had all the time in the world. Because in a way, I did. That was the part they didn't understand. That was the part they never saw. I closed the suitcase and sat on the edge of the bed, my hands resting in my lap. The house was quiet again. Too quiet. It reminded me of 2 nights ago. The way Daniel had avoided my eyes at dinner. The way Ashley had kept checking her phone, her expression tightening each time a message came through. Something had already shifted then. I had felt it. I always did. That's why, 48 hours earlier, I had made a decision. A quiet one. A final one. I stood up and took one last look around the room. Not with sadness. Not with regret. Just acknowledgement. Then I picked up my suitcase and walked back downstairs. Daniel looked at me, uncertain now, as if he expected a different version of me to come down those stairs. "You're leaving already?" he asked. I met his eyes for the first time that morning. "Yes," I said simply. I reached for my coat, slipping it on with slow, practiced ease. My hand paused briefly on the doorknob, just for a moment. Then I opened the door and stepped outside into the cool morning air. Behind me, the house stood quiet, still, unaware that it no longer belonged to him. 48 hours earlier, the house had still felt like mine. Not in the legal sense, not anymore, but in the quiet, invisible ways that come from years of routine. I woke up before sunrise, the way I always had, and made my way to the kitchen without turning on the lights. I knew every inch of that space in the dark. The coffee maker hummed softly as it brewed, the same sound that had started my mornings for decades. I poured myself a cup and stood by the window, watching the early morning light stretch across the backyard. The oak tree Daniel had climbed as a boy still stood there, tall and steady, its branches casting long shadows across the grass. For a moment, everything looked the same, but it did not feel the same. I had noticed it weeks before, the subtle shifts. The way conversations stopped when I entered the room. The way Ashley's voice would lower just enough that I could not quite hear what she was saying. The way Daniel had begun to avoid sitting across from me at the dinner table, choosing instead the seat beside her, angled away, as if proximity to me required effort. That morning, there was something else. An absence. I opened the drawer where we kept the spare house key. It was gone. I closed the drawer slowly, my fingers resting on the handle for a second longer than necessary. Then I walked to the small desk in the corner of the living room, the one where I kept our household papers. The folder was not where I had left it. It had been moved. Not much. Just enough. I sat down and opened the drawer beneath it, pulling out what remained. Bills. Old receipts. A few insurance documents. But the property papers were missing. I did not call out for Daniel. I did not ask Ashley if she had seen them. I already knew the answer would not come in words. It would come later, in actions. It always did. Instead, I returned everything to its place, aligning the edges carefully, as if restoring order to a room that had already begun to shift beneath my feet. Later that afternoon, I heard them in the kitchen. Their voices carried just enough for me to catch fragments. "She will not fight it," Ashley said quietly. "She does not have the energy." There was a pause. Then Daniel's voice, hesitant. "It is still her home." "Not for long," she replied. The words settled in the air like dust, invisible but impossible to ignore. I stood in the hallway, just out of sight, my hand resting lightly against the wall for balance. I did not move. I did not interrupt. I simply listened. Something inside me did not break. It did not shatter or collapse. It shifted, slowly, deliberately, like a door closing without sound. That evening, I made dinner as usual. Pot roast, carrots, mashed potatoes. Daniel's favorite. Ashley thanked me with a polite smile that did not reach her eyes. Daniel barely spoke. He kept checking his phone, his brow furrowed, as if he was waiting for something. Or someone. I watched them, both with quiet attention, noticing details I might have overlooked before. The way Ashley's hand rested lightly on Daniel's arm whenever she spoke, guiding his attention back to her. The way he nodded, almost automatically, as if her words carried more weight than his own thoughts. After dinner, I cleared the table alone. The plates clinked softly as I stacked them, the sound echoing slightly in the otherwise quiet room. I washed each dish slowly, methodically, the warm water running over my hands as if time itself had slowed. When I finished, I dried my hands and walked to the living room. I picked up my phone and sat down in my usual chair. For a moment, I stared at the screen. Then I dialed a number I had not called in years. It rang twice before a voice answered. Calm. Familiar. "Rachel," I said. There was a brief silence on the other end. Then, "Margaret." I closed my eyes for just a second. "I think it is time we talked." The next morning, I met Rachel at a small cafe just outside town, the kind of place people passed by without noticing, tucked between a dry cleaner and a hardware store that had been there longer than I could remember. I arrived early. I always did. Old habits do not disappear just because the people who once depended on them do. I chose a table by the window and sat with my hands folded neatly in front of me, watching the parking lot as cars came and went. When Rachel walked in, I recognized her immediately, even after all these years. She looked older, of course, but not in a way that suggested weakness. There was something steadier about her now, something settled. She spotted me, hesitated for just a fraction of a second, then walked over. "Margaret," she said softly. "Rachel," I replied, offering a small nod. We did not hug. There was no need for that kind of performance. She sat across from me, placing her purse carefully on the chair beside her. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The waitress came, took our order, and left us alone again. It was Rachel who broke the silence. "I was surprised to hear from you," she said. "I imagine you were," I answered. I studied her face, the way her eyes held mine without flinching. She had always been like that, even back then, especially back then. "How is he?" she asked after a moment. I did not need to ask who she meant. "He is different," I said. Or perhaps I am only seeing him clearly now. Rachel let out a quiet breath, something between a sigh and a soft laugh. "That sounds familiar." The coffee arrived. We both reached for our cups at the same time, then paused, a small, almost unnoticeable echo of the past. I pulled my hand back slightly, letting her go first. Some habits, even now, remained. "Why did you call me?" she asked finally, her voice calm but direct. I did not answer right away. Instead, I reached into my bag and placed a thin folder on the table between us. Not pushing it toward her. Not yet. Just letting it sit there. "They are planning to remove me from the house," I said. Rachel's expression did not change, but I saw it in her eyes. Recognition, not surprise. "Ashley," she said quietly. It was not a question. I nodded once. "She has been reorganizing things." Rachel gave a small, knowing smile. "She does that." There was no bitterness in her tone, just certainty. I looked down at the folder for a moment, then back at her. I heard them yesterday, I continued. They believe I will not resist. Rachel leaned back slightly in her chair, her gaze sharpening. And will you? I met her eyes. No, I said. Not in the way they expect. That seemed to interest her. She tilted her head just slightly, studying me now with a different kind of attention. You have something in mind, she said. I slid the folder toward her then. Slowly, deliberately. She placed her hand on it, but did not open it right away. Before you look, I said, my voice even, I want to ask you something. She waited. When you left Daniel, I said, what made you finally walk away? Rachel held my gaze for a long second. Then she opened the folder. Her eyes moved across the first page, then the second. I watched the moment she understood. It was subtle, a slight stillness, a pause in her breathing. She closed the folder gently and looked back up at me. He never really listens, she said. Not unless someone teaches him how. I gave a small nod. Then perhaps it is time he learns. Rachel's fingers rested lightly on the folder, tapping once, twice, as if measuring the weight of the decision in front of her. This is not a small step, Margaret, she said. I am aware. It will change things, she added. It already has, I replied. She studied me for another moment. Then something in her expression shifted. Not hesitation, not doubt, something closer to agreement. What do you need from me? She asked. I leaned back slightly in my chair, my hands returning to their place in my lap. I need you to say yes, I said quietly, and to let them believe they are still in control. Rachel looked down at the folder again, then back at me. This time, when she spoke, her voice carried a calm certainty. All right, she said. Let us do it your way. After that morning at the cafe, everything moved quietly. There were no dramatic confrontations, no raised voices, no sudden changes that could be traced back to a single moment. That was the point. I returned home that afternoon just as the sun was beginning to dip, casting long shadows across the driveway. Daniel's car was already there. Ashley's too. I stepped inside, closing the door gently behind me, the familiar sound echoing through the hallway like it always had. Nothing looked different. And yet, everything was. You were out, Daniel said from the living room, his tone casual, but his eyes searching. Yes, I replied, removing my coat and hanging it in its usual place. Just running errands. He nodded, though I could see the question linger behind his expression. Ashley glanced up briefly from her phone, her gaze flicking over me before returning to the screen. If she suspected anything, she did not show it. That evening, I followed the same routine. Dinner at 6. Dishes at 7. A quiet hour in the living room before heading upstairs. Predictable. Steady. Invisible. That was how they preferred me. And for now, I allowed it. The next day, I made a call. Then another. Each conversation short, precise, and purposeful. I did not waste words. I did not explain more than necessary. By the end of the afternoon, everything was in motion. Documents prepared. Meetings scheduled. Signatures arranged. It was not complicated, not really. It only required timing. And patience. Two things I had spent a lifetime mastering. That night, as I sat at the dining table across from Daniel and Ashley, I noticed the way they spoke more freely now. The quiet caution from before had softened, replaced by a subtle confidence. They believed the outcome was already decided, that I had accepted my place in it. We have been thinking, Ashley said, setting her fork down with deliberate care. It might be best if you started looking at some smaller places. Something easier to manage. Daniel nodded beside her, though he did not meet my eyes. It would be more comfortable, he added. I took a sip of water, letting the silence stretch just long enough to settle over the table. I will consider it, I said. My voice was calm. Even. That seemed to satisfy them. Or at least, it gave them what they needed to hear. After dinner, I returned to my room and closed the door behind me. The folder sat on my dresser, exactly where I had left it. I opened it and reviewed the pages once more. Not because I needed to, because I wanted to. Each line, each signature, each detail carefully placed, like pieces on a board that had already been set. I closed it again and placed it back in its spot. The following morning, I met with the attorney. His office was quiet, professional, the kind of place where decisions were made without emotion. He reviewed everything carefully, asking a few questions, confirming a few details. I answered each one without hesitation. When it was time to sign, I did so without pause. The pen moved steadily across the page. No trembling, no doubt, just a simple, final motion. Are you certain you wish to proceed this way? He asked, his tone neutral. I looked at him for a moment, then gave a small nod. Yes, I said. I am. He gathered the documents, organizing them with practiced precision. Then everything will be finalized within 24 hours, he said. I stood, smoothing my coat as I prepared to leave. Outside, the air felt cooler than it had the day before. Or perhaps I was simply more aware of it now. When I returned home, Daniel was not there. Ashley was in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone. She glanced up as I entered, offering a polite smile that did not quite reach her eyes. How was your day? She asked. I set my bag down and met her gaze briefly. Productive, I replied. She held my gaze for a second longer than usual, as if searching for something she could not quite name. Then she nodded and looked back down at her screen. That night, I slept well, better than I had in weeks. Not because anything had been resolved, but because, for the first time, I knew exactly how it would end. The following morning, I woke up before dawn, the house still wrapped in that quiet, fragile stillness that only exists before anyone else rises. For a moment, I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the heater kicking on and off, the familiar rhythm that had once brought comfort. Now it simply marked time. I sat up slowly, placing my feet on the floor, and took a steady breath. Today was the day everything would begin to reveal itself, though not in the way Daniel or Ashley expected. Downstairs, the kitchen was exactly as I had left it the night before. Clean, orderly, untouched. I prepared breakfast the same way I always had. Coffee first, then toast. Eggs for Daniel, though I no longer needed to ask how he liked them. Some habits stay long after they are no longer appreciated. When he came down, he looked surprised to see everything already set. You did not have to do all this, he said, though he still sat down and picked up his fork without hesitation. I know, I replied simply, taking my seat across from him. Ashley joined a few minutes later, her steps light, her expression composed. She glanced at the table, then at me, as if trying to measure something she could not quite define. You are up early, she said. I always am, I answered. Breakfast passed in near silence, the kind that used to feel comfortable. Now, it felt like space waiting to be filled by something else. Daniel cleared his throat once, as if considering saying something, then thought better of it. Ashley checked her phone twice, her fingers tapping lightly against the screen, a small, restless motion. They were waiting, not for me, for something to happen. They just did not know when. After they finished, Daniel stood and reached for his keys. I will be out most of the day, he said, avoiding my eyes again. Work. Of course, I replied. Ashley lingered a moment longer, watching me as I gathered the dishes. If you need help packing, she said, her voice smooth, almost gentle, I can assist. I paused just long enough to acknowledge the offer. That will not be necessary, I said. She nodded slowly, studying my face as if searching for resistance, for emotion, for anything she could use. Finding none, she turned and followed Daniel out the door. The house fell silent again. This time, it felt different. Not empty, not abandoned, just waiting. I washed the dishes carefully, drying each one and placing it back in its exact spot. When I finished, I walked to the living room and sat down, my hands resting lightly in my lap. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, each second measured, deliberate. At exactly 10:30, there was a knock at the door. Not loud, not urgent, just precise. I stood and walked over, opening it without hesitation. The man on the other side wore a neatly pressed suit, a folder tucked under his arm. Behind him, another figure stepped forward. Rachel. She met my eyes with a calm, steady expression. Good morning, the man said politely. Mrs. Collins? I nodded. Yes. I am here to finalize a few details, he continued, his tone professional, measured. Is now a convenient time? I stepped aside, allowing them both to enter. It is, I said. We moved into the living room, the same space where Daniel had taken his first steps, where holidays had been celebrated, where laughter had once filled every corner. Now it held something else. Closure. The man opened his folder, placing several documents on the table with careful precision. Rachel stood beside him, her presence quiet but firm. As of this morning, he began, the transfer has been completed. I listened without interruption, my gaze steady. All that remains is acknowledgement of receipt and confirmation of access. I reached for the pen he offered, my fingers closing around it without hesitation. I signed where indicated, each stroke deliberate, final. When I finished, I placed the pen down and looked up. Rachel gave a slight nod. No words were needed. Everything that mattered had already been decided. The man gathered the documents, organizing them neatly before placing them back into his folder. You will receive official copies by mail within 3 to 5 business days, he said. However, the change is effective immediately. I stood, smoothing my hands over the front of my coat. Thank you, I said. He inclined his head politely, then made his way toward the door. Rachel lingered a moment longer. Are you ready? She asked quietly. I looked around the room one last time. Not with sadness, not with hesitation, just acknowledgement. Yes, I said, because now, there was nothing left to wait for. That afternoon, I did not leave the house right away. Rachel had stepped outside to take a call, and the man had already driven off, his work completed with the quiet efficiency of someone who understood the weight of final decisions without needing to acknowledge them. I remained in the living room, standing still for a moment longer than necessary, letting the silence settle around me. It was not the same silence as before. This one did not feel heavy or uncertain. It felt complete. I walked slowly through the house, not to reminisce, not to linger, but to close something that had already ended. The kitchen came first. I ran my fingers lightly along the edge of the counter, the surface smooth and familiar beneath my touch. The cabinets were still aligned the way I had arranged them years ago, every plate and glass in its proper place. Nothing had been disturbed. Not yet. Upstairs, my bedroom waited just as I had left it that morning. The suitcase sat near the door, half filled, as if it had been paused mid-thought. I added a few more items. Clothes, a small jewelry box, the photograph from the nightstand. I did not take everything. Only what mattered. Only what belonged to me in a way no document could define. When I finished, I closed the suitcase and stood there for a moment, my gaze moving across the room one last time. Then I turned and walked out. Downstairs, I placed the suitcase by the front door. The clock on the wall read 2:15 in the afternoon. Daniel would not be home for several hours. Ashley either. That gave me time. Not that I needed it. Everything that required timing had already been done. I stepped outside, the cool air brushing lightly against my face, and found Rachel leaning against her car, her phone now tucked away in her purse. She looked up as I approached, her expression steady. All set? She asked. I nodded once. Yes. She glanced toward the house, then back at me. Do you want to stay nearby? She asked. Just until they get back. I considered it for a brief moment, then shook my head. No, I said. They will understand without me standing there. Rachel studied me for a second longer, then gave a small nod. All right. We loaded the suitcase into the back of her car, the motion simple, unremarkable. When it was done, I turned back toward the house one last time. Not with hesitation, not with doubt, just acknowledgement. Then I got into the passenger seat, and Rachel started the engine. We drove in silence for a while, the road stretching out ahead of us in long, steady lines. The town passed by in familiar fragments. The grocery store on the corner. The small park where Daniel used to play as a child. The church we had attended every Sunday for years. Each place holding a memory that no longer needed to be revisited. After about 20 minutes, Rachel spoke. They will not take it well, she said. Her tone was not concerned, just factual. I kept my eyes on the road ahead. No, I replied. They will not. There was a pause. Are you prepared for that? She asked. I allowed myself a small breath, then answered. I have already prepared, I said. This is simply the result. Rachel nodded, as if that was enough. And it was. We reached her house just before 3 o'clock. It was smaller than mine. Modest. Quiet. But there was something about it that felt settled. She pulled into the driveway and turned off the engine. You can stay here as long as you need, she said. I turned to her, meeting her gaze fully. Thank you, I replied. She gave a slight smile, then stepped out of the car. I followed, taking in the space around me, the way the light fell across the front porch, the quiet stillness of the neighborhood. It felt different, not unfamiliar, just new. Inside, she showed me to a guest room, simple but comfortable. I placed my suitcase on the bed and opened it, arranging a few items without urgency. There was no need to rush. For the first time in a long while, there was nothing pressing against me, no unspoken tension waiting to surface. Just space, time, and the quiet certainty that, Somewhere across town, a door was about to open, and everything Daniel believed to be his was about to change. Late that afternoon, just as the sun began to dip lower in the sky, I was sitting quietly in Rachel's living room, my hands folded in my lap, when her phone buzzed softly on the coffee table. She glanced at the screen, then looked up at me. She did not need to say anything. I already knew. It had begun. She answered the call without hesitation, her voice calm, steady. "Hello." There was a pause, and even from across the room, I could hear the tension in the faint sound of Daniel's voice on the other end. Not the words, just the tone. Confusion first, then something sharper. Rachel listened without interrupting, her expression composed, her gaze steady. "You should read the documents carefully," she said after a moment. Her voice was neither cold nor kind, just factual. Another pause, longer this time. I watched her fingers rest lightly against the edge of the table, completely still. "No," she continued, "there is no mistake." She listened again, her eyes flicking toward me briefly before returning to the middle distance. "Yes," she said finally, "it is effective immediately." Then she ended the call. The room fell silent again, but it was not the same silence as before. This one carried something else beneath it. The sound of realization, settling in somewhere else, far from where we sat. Rachel placed her phone down carefully and leaned back slightly. "He is at the house," she said. I nodded once. I expected that. She studied me for a moment, as if weighing whether to say more, then simply added, "Ashley is there too." I did not respond right away. Instead, I let the image form in my mind. The front door opening, the familiar hallway, the space that had always welcomed him now holding something different. Something he did not recognize. "He asked if you were there," Rachel said after a moment. I looked up at her. "And what did you tell him?" She gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "I told him the truth," she said, "that you no longer live there." I let that settle, the words simple, direct, carrying a weight that did not need to be explained. Across town, Daniel would be standing in a space he believed he controlled, holding on to something that no longer belonged to him. The same way he had handed me those papers, believing they meant something final, believing they gave him authority. Control is a quiet thing. It does not announce itself. It simply shifts. Rachel stood and walked to the window, glancing out as if the answer might be written somewhere beyond the glass. "He was not expecting this," she said. "No," I replied. "He was not." There was another pause, longer this time. Not uncomfortable, just full. "Do you think he understands?" she asked. I considered the question carefully before answering. "Not yet," I said. "But he will." Rachel nodded slowly, as if that confirmed something she already knew. The evening light continued to fade, the room growing softer, quieter. I remained where I was, my posture steady, my breathing even. There was no urgency in me. No need to call. No need to explain. Everything that needed to be said had already been written, signed, and delivered in the only language that mattered. Actions. After a while, Rachel returned to her seat across from me. "He might come here," she said. "It is possible." I met her gaze, calm and certain. "Then he will come," I said. "And when he does?" she asked. I allowed a small pause, not for hesitation, but for clarity. "Then he will see," I said quietly. Rachel held my gaze for a moment longer, then gave a slight nod, as if accepting the simplicity of it. Outside, the last light of the day slipped below the horizon, leaving the world in that quiet space between what was and what comes next. And somewhere not far away, a man stood in a house that was no longer his, holding papers that meant nothing, finally beginning to understand that the story he thought he was writing had already been finished without him. The knock came just after 7 in the evening. It was not hesitant, not uncertain. It was firm, controlled, the kind of knock that expects an answer. Rachel and I both heard it at the same time. She glanced at me, her expression steady, as if asking a question without words. I gave a small nod. She stood and walked toward the door, her steps unhurried. I remained seated, my hands resting lightly in my lap, my posture unchanged. When she opened the door, Daniel stood there, his shoulders tense, his jaw set in a way I had not seen since he was a boy trying to hide frustration he did not yet understand. Ashley stood slightly behind him, her arms crossed, her expression sharp, calculating, as if she was already searching for the angle that would give her control of the situation. For a moment, no one spoke. The space between them held everything that had already happened, everything that could not be undone. "We need to talk," Daniel said finally, his voice tight, controlled. Rachel did not step aside. She simply looked at him, her expression calm. "About what?" she asked. He hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, as if the question itself had unsettled him. "About the house," he said. The word hung there, heavier than it should have been. Rachel's gaze did not shift. "What about it?" she asked. Ashley stepped forward slightly then, her voice smooth, but edged with something sharper beneath it. "You know exactly what," she said. "There has been some kind of mistake." Rachel tilted her head just slightly, her expression unchanged. "There is no mistake," she said. Daniel exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair, his composure beginning to thin. "I have the paperwork," he said, pulling a folded set of documents from his jacket pocket, holding them out as if they proved something. "This house belongs to me now." Rachel glanced at the papers, then back at him. "You should read them again," she said. Her tone was even, unmoved. Ashley's eyes narrowed slightly. "We already have," she said quickly. "And whatever you think you did, it is not going to hold up." Rachel did not respond immediately. She simply stepped back then, just enough to allow the doorway to open fully. "You can come in," she said. Daniel hesitated, his gaze shifting past her into the house. And that was when he saw me. I had not moved. Not since the knock. I sat exactly where I had been, my posture straight, my hands still, my expression calm. For a moment, something in his face changed. Not anger. Not yet. Something closer to disbelief. "Mom," he said, the word coming out quieter than he intended. I met his eyes without hesitation. "Daniel," I replied. He stepped inside then, Ashley close behind him, her attention shifting quickly between Rachel and me, measuring, calculating, adjusting. "What is going on?" Daniel asked, his voice no longer controlled, the edge of confusion now clear. I did not answer right away. Instead, I allowed the silence to settle, to stretch just long enough to make him feel it. Then I spoke. "The house has been sold," I said simply. Ashley let out a short, sharp laugh, shaking her head. "That is not possible," she said. "You cannot just. It is already done," I continued, my voice steady, cutting through hers without force, without volume. Just certainty. Daniel looked between us, his grip tightening on the papers in his hand. "To who?" he asked. Rachel stepped forward then, her presence quiet but unmistakable. "To me," she said. The room fell still, completely still. Ashley's expression shifted first, the confidence cracking just enough to reveal something beneath it. Not fear. Not yet. But something close. Daniel stared at Rachel, then back at me, as if trying to place the pieces into something that made sense. "You sold the house to her?" he said slowly. I nodded once. "Yes." He shook his head, stepping back slightly, as if the space itself had changed around him. "Why would you do that?" he asked. The question lingered, heavier than the ones before it. I looked at him, not with anger, not with disappointment, but with something quieter, something final. "Because you already decided I did not belong there," I said. And this time, there was no confusion left in the room. Only the sound of something shifting, quietly, permanently, into place. Daniel did not speak for a long moment after that. The question he had asked still lingered in the air, but the answer had already settled into place, heavier than anything he could argue against. His grip on the papers loosened slightly, the edges bending under his fingers as if even they no longer held the authority he thought they did. Ashley recovered first. She always did. Her posture straightened, her expression sharpening as she stepped forward, placing herself just slightly ahead of him again. "This is not over," she said, her voice controlled, but carrying a strain that had not been there before. "You cannot just remove us like this. We live there. We have rights." Rachel did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "You have exactly the rights outlined in the documents you were given," she said calmly. Nothing more. Ashley opened her mouth to respond, but no words came immediately. For the first time, she seemed to be searching for something she could not easily find. Daniel finally looked down at the papers in his hands, flipping through them again, slower this time, his eyes moving more carefully across each line. The confidence that had carried him earlier was gone, replaced by something quieter, something heavier. Understanding does not arrive all at once. It settles in layers. He looked back up at me then, and I saw it. Not anger. Not even resentment. Just the beginning of clarity. You planned this, he said, his voice lower now, almost uncertain. I met his gaze without hesitation. Yes, I said. There was no need to explain further. No need to soften it. Ashley let out a short breath, shaking her head as if trying to dismiss what she could not control. This is ridiculous, she said, though the certainty in her voice had thinned. We will speak to a lawyer. We will fix this. Rachel's expression did not change. You are free to do that, she said. But I suggest you read everything carefully before you spend time trying to change something that has already been completed. Silence followed. A long one. The kind that does not invite interruption. Daniel lowered the papers slowly, his hands no longer steady. He looked around the room, as if seeing it for the first time, as if trying to understand how everything had shifted without him noticing. Then his eyes returned to me. You did not even tell me, he said quietly. It was not an accusation. Not fully. It sounded more like something else. A realization he had not expected to face. I held his gaze for a moment, then answered simply. You did not ask. The words settled between us, simple and exact. Ashley turned toward him then, her voice lower now, urgent. We need to go, she said. We should not stay here. He did not move right away. For a second, it looked as if he might say something else. Something more. But then he nodded once, folding the papers without care this time, slipping them back into his jacket. All right, he said. They turned toward the door together, Ashley already moving ahead, Daniel following a step behind. At the threshold, he paused briefly, his hand resting against the frame. He did not turn back. Not fully. I did not think you would do something like this, he said, his voice quieter now. I did not respond immediately. I did not need to. When I did speak, my tone remained steady. Neither did I said. He stood there for a second longer, then stepped outside, the door closing behind him with a soft, final sound. The house grew quiet again. Rachel remained where she was, her posture relaxed, her expression calm. After a moment, she exhaled softly. That went as expected, she said. I gave a small nod. Yes. There was nothing more to add, nothing more to explain. I stood slowly, smoothing my hands over my coat, the motion familiar, grounding. The room around me felt still, but not empty. Not anymore. Just complete. Rachel glanced toward me. What will you do now? She asked. I considered the question for a moment, not because I did